1 out of every 5 students report being bullied. 13% were made fun of, called names, or insulted. They were pushed, shoved, tripped, or spit on. 1 in 5 tweens have been cyberbullied. It's a problem, and it has to stop. Welcome to Bully This, a hero's journey. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Our passion is to show kids that there is life after bullying. You'll hear from former bullies and bullying victims, and you'll hear how they made their journey from troubled youth to successful adults. Welcome to Bully This, a hero's journey. Now your hosts, Tyler Copenhaver Heath and Clifford Starks.
Hello and welcome to episode 7, Bully This, a hero's journey. I'm Tyler.
I'm Cliff.
Okay, Cliff, you cheated last week.
I know. I'm going to look this way this time.
All right. So starting out our episodes, if you guys have been following the show the last couple episodes, I try to choose a celebrity that we can go into a couple details, and Cliff's going to try to guess who it is. So here we go this week. She was tortured for her pixie haircut and love of men's suits. Her bullies beat her so bad one time, she had to have stitches. Later, she would run into one of her bullies who asked her for her autograph. She did not give the autograph. Who do you think it is?
Pink. Or is it Cardi B?
Nope. Gail,
neither of them.
Gail, do you have any idea?
No.
Okay. It's Winona Ryder.
Okay, I would have never guessed that. Okay.
Yep. So we all have things in life that we regret. Many of us, outside of Cliff here, wish we had a time machine and we could go back and change some things. But since we cannot, all we can do is reflect and build from it. What if you felt like the bully? Your reaction to a situation that changed the trajectory of your childhood forever. What if your bully move was something you still think about to this day? How do you begin to make amends without the time machine you desire? I want to welcome today Gail Cornwall. Gail is a former public school teacher and lawyer who now spends her time as a freelance writer and mother. She has written for The Atlantic, Guardian, The New York Times, USA Today, San Francisco Chronicle, Forbes, and more. Much of her writing involves children, education, and the subject of bullying. Looking through Gail's website of freelance articles is an education into the child's mind and school dilemma. If you get a chance, check out Gail's website and her articles. Amazing. Her article, A Cruel Thing I Said as a Kid, made me a pariah for years. It took me on an emotional roller coaster ride. A quote from the article might say it best. From that day forward, I was cast out. The teachers glared at me, shaking their heads and whispering underneath their breath. None of the kids would play with me. Gail has gone on to be a champion for education and parenting. We're so glad to have her here, but I guess it's best if Gail tells it. Welcome, Gail.
Hey, Gail.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So first time on the show, so I'll give you a little bit of rundown. We're going to go through the hero's journey, and your hero's journey is going to start. I would love for you to go into a little bit of the article Pariah and give a little bit of background and how that affected your life, kind of touching on some things that might resonate with kids and making them understand kind of your background as kid in the bully arena.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you had told the 12-year-old me that I would write about this topic publicly, I would have thought you were crazy. It was the one thing I never wanted anybody to find out about me, right? Is that I, on the playground one day, had said this really horrible thing. I had like a quick wit. I had a quick draw, and I was in it with this other child, and I just went for the jugular, really. And it was awful. And I knew it right away. I knew it the minute it escaped my mouth. And as I said in the article, we had this go-between, right? So she'd say an insult, and the girl would run it over to me, and then I'd say the insult, and the girl would run back. And I tried to catch the girl and be like, "Don't say it, don't say it." But she was a little too excited about just the drama, and she said it, and then I regretted it. It was for years. Just thinking about it made me feel so awful.
Well, and I want to stick up for Gail too, because in the article you get a chance to go into this, and I want to make sure it gets said on the show too, because they were already bullying you quite a bit. They were not giving you the easiest time, and there was a group of them as opposed to just you.
It's interesting because I think that a lot of the times when we think of bullying, we think of somebody who's not your friend, right? It's somebody totally separate, and then there's you. And this was actually my friend group, and I had
Yeah.
never, and I was kind of a peripheral member. Like I knew they didn't like me as much as they liked other. I was a low status member of their group. Um,
Mhm.
but I actually never saw it as me being bullied until after I published the article at 41 years old. And all these people wrote out and said, "Hey, what were you supposed to do? You were bullied." And I had never seen it that way. But then looking back at it, objectively, stepping away from the emotion of it, I was like, you know what? Some pretty horrible things were being said to me, and I was being treated pretty terribly for quite some time before that incident happened.
Yeah. Well, and it can be we have very few defense mechanisms, especially when it's people that we like, so, and we find that a lot on the show. It's actually friends that are being some of the most mean people and, are messing with our minds. But then at the same time, the group behavior, and you literally have somebody that's kind of picking on you through somebody else. And so I just want to make it real clear to the audience, that you had these, hurdles that you were dealing with through the bullying endeavor. And I had the same issue. I didn't totally realize that I was kind of bullied from teachers. I never saw myself that way until reflection recently through the show. So I think it's important that people know that, you were dealing with these things. And we tend to, when we're backed into a corner, we only get so many tools that we can use.
Well, it's really interesting you say that because I'm just thinking right now. One of the things I like to do with my writing is read academic research, right? Read what these really smart psychologists have to say and figure out how it really applies to the rest of us. And there are two types of bullying: the proactive and the reactive, right?
Mhm.
And then there's a couple other types that I can talk about, but in this story shows both, right? There's the comments they made to me that were, you know, I don't think I did anything to deserve them, right? They were
Sure.
proactive. They were meant to maintain status. And then the bullying I did back was reactive, right? And
Yeah.
that's I've been pushed, I snap. And I just
Yeah.
can't, I lose my self-control, right?
Yeah.
And seeing, a lot of times when people talk about bullying, they have an image in their head of one or the other, right? And I
Yeah.
think when we talk about it, we have to remember there are so many different situations that can lead to a kid engaging in bullying behavior.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you for sharing that and saying like you're going into the layers of what things are. And what's super cool, like I'm glad you spoke to the audience. As the audience, we're speaking in a safe space, because when we're in that safe space, we have room for discussion. And when we have room for discussion, there's always a why people are doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing.
Because it still feels like, do you have a little regret about the way you handled it?
It's I actually you don't know this, but I've actually been researching regret a lot too and looking into the phenomenon of regret. And
Yeah.
to the extent that if I were to go back in time, would I do it differently? I would like to think that if I were in the same circumstance, or if one of my kids were in the same circumstance, they would behave differently. I would behave differently. But this moment was so fundamental for me, and it really made me who I am. So I can't
Yeah.
say, if I had a button, would I change it? I don't think I would, because I think that I learned from it and I grew from it. And that's what I'm learning about regret is a lot of people think of it as a negative thing, but your regrets actually have this huge positive power if you can grow from them and learn from them.
Oh, that's so
Get
well
it?
put.
Get it?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Clifford has a different mind, and that's what's nice about the two of us. We have, similarities, but we have major differences. And I regret a lot of things in life. But like you're saying, I mean, I actually like to say this: there's no time machine, right? If I regret something, all I can do is make tomorrow's work make that regret pale in comparison, and then we can try to outdo that, and it can lead to big gains. Clifford doesn't regret anything in life. And do you not regret it because you feel you build from it, or you just don't regret it? It happened. It happened.
I build from it every single time. Like everything that's ever happened to me, I get to use it. I get to use this tea bottle. Like, what am I going to do with the tea bottle? Am I going to drink the tea bottle? Am I going to throw the tea bottle? Am I going to like squeeze the tea bottle. What am I going to do with it? And you're just experiencing emotions and using those emotions. And I love that you say, like, look, I was 12, I'm 41. I'm 41 and I get to experience and take this emotion and turn it into something different. How boring would life be if we just had a time machine to change we would all screw it up, by the way. I'm just letting people know, like everyone be, oh crap, I got to reset. That's the beauty of life. There isn't a reset.
I'd be resetting every other week.
Yeah, you'd be like, Tyler's still 4. Crap.
Gail, given what happened, can you just so that it can resonate a little bit with the kids that watch, could you tell a little bit about the feeling around that and kind of the loneliness that you had to experience, through the, let's say, the bullying phase of your life?
It's my job is to put words to things, and it's one of those things that's really difficult to put words to, because I think when you've felt it, you've felt it. And the loneliness of just feeling, I think, looking back, for me, the worst part was not even feeling like everybody hated me. That was clear. Everybody hated me. The worst part was wondering, and not even sometimes wondering, knowing I deserved it. I would sit there and be like, this kid doesn't want to sit with me. I wouldn't want to sit with me either. Like, that was the worst part, was just feeling like they're right. They're right. I'm worthless. And I had let it all, it was a different time then, in terms of therapy, in terms of like social emotional resources available to kids. And I had just internalized all of it. And I really thought that I was just awful, and no wonder nobody wanted to sit with me. It felt like there was a hole in me that needed filling. Like somebody scooped something out of me, and I didn't know if it was me and it was my fault that something was scooped out of me, but it just every single day felt like I was defective. I was the only one. I didn't know the numbers on bullying. I didn't know the numbers on people feeling like they don't have friends. I didn't know that it's actually really common in adolescence to feel that way. All I saw was on TV, everybody with their best friend and their friend group, and everybody was happy. And one of the things I try to do now is educate kids on just how common it is to feel really, really lonely and even defective when you're an adolescent.
To be fair, I don't think the punishment fit the crime. I know you're kind of thinking it did. I mean, we all make mistakes, right? And you regretted it that instant, but unfortunately that person was already en route, already delivering this message, and it was too late. You literally, you felt it that quickly, and this caused, years of suffering afterwards and loneliness. So, I mean, just to be fair, and I've read the article, and I suggest that our audience do it too, because honestly, wonderful article. It took me on like an emotional roller coaster ride. I was infatuated by it, and it just like I could feel everything. That's the thing. The hardest things in life for us to describe, you did it. Like I could feel the emotion in it. Like somehow you poured that right into there, and I could feel it, and that's why I knew like there was some sort of regret. But good for you to be able to recognize that this is a way to build and look backwards. And it's really tough. And that's what we try to get the kids to understand in this show too, because what they're going through right now is hard, right? And it's really tough to tell them, don't worry, tomorrow we'll make it worth it. Because in the moment, it doesn't feel like it. In that loneliness, I'm sure that wouldn't have felt worth it at that moment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think another really hard line to walk is, sometimes we go straight to the silver linings and we say, "Oh, you're going to grow from this," and we almost put it on kids like to-do lists, sort of. Like we almost make it like, okay, it's your job to make lemonade out of this. It's your job to
Yeah.
be a bigger person. And we have to balance that with just like, it sucks. What's happening to you sucks, and it's wrong and it's
Yep.
terrible. And as parents or as educators, not go straight to, well, you're going to be stronger because of it, or just wait till down the line,
Yep.
when you get
It's
bigger
I
that
or
fire.
absolutely,
whatever.
I absolutely love that. You speak so eloquently too.
Yeah.
I can tell like your writing is literally coming out on your message, because I'm feeling the message, and I want to hug little Gail.
Yeah.
Little Gail, like I just want to give her a hug. But just off of what you said, like there's the internal and the external, and this just brings something up into me. Like I was so internally strong that I just sucked it up. You know, I just sucked, like, I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. And then I realized not everyone was that. Not everyone's built the same. Some people, they just can't internally do this thing. And Tyler speaks on this is to say, like, well, what about the kids that don't have that? What about the people who don't have support?
Yeah.
What about the people who are not where they need to be? And I'm telling you, there's an internal strength in you. I want to know, like, where that transition happened, because you felt like absolute crap, but you were internalizing. You're a strong person, because I can tell you're looking within. You look within, and not everybody even does that.
Yeah, that brings up two things for me. One is, especially with kids, but actually with people of any age, you can't assume you know what's going on from the surface, right? Like
Yeah.
you look at a
Mhm.
kid who's angry and they're lashing out, and part of us is just primed to be like, what a dick, this kid, like what are they doing? Like they're so mean, and you don't know what happened to them that morning. You don't know how they're treated at home. You don't
Mhm.
know if it's reactive or proactive, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And you don't know if it's just they're suffering, or they're another category of bullying can often come from folks with disabilities, folks that just aren't
Sure.
able to control themselves in the same way. So I'll start with that piece of you're right, you're absolutely right, not everybody has the same internal reserves, and we just have to try to feel some empathy around that. And for the kids out there who are being bullied, I'm going to go with that joint message I was talking about earlier, right? Like,
Mhm.
feeling the empathy doesn't negate what's happening to you. It doesn't make it any less bad what's happening to you. So that's
Totally.
not an
Yep.
ask that you forget about what you're experiencing to feel that empathy.
Yep.
100%.
And then,
The oh, sorry,
sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was actually just gonna quote Lady Gaga, believe it or not, because she had actually something introspective, I think, in this what we're talking about, and it was the quote I gave last week.
Mhm.
I'm going to paraphrase it, but she basically said, "We've made bullying this rite of passage that has to happen, for adolescents, and that's not fair." Because that to me is what you're kind of saying too. It's like, why does this have to be? And then the question is, if we're talking about Winona Ryder today, what does she feel today? Is she okay with the bullying happening? Because look at what she became, like, is she looking back in retrospect and saying, you know what, the bullying was part of who I became and it brought me to where I am now? Or Lady Gaga, same thing. Are they okay with it at this time?
I'm going to pick up the first ball first, and that is the piece about the rite of passage. And I think
Mm.
that we have really great evidence showing that it doesn't have to be that way. It's a cultural issue, whether you're talking about a national culture or whether you're talking about a school culture. So, for example, a guy named Mitch Prinstein has done a lot of research and shows that when you do the exact same study, exact same age kids, you do it in the US and you do it in China. Um, Aggression is rewarded in the US in a way that it is not rewarded in China. So
Hmm.
some of the more aggressive bullying behavior, same age kids, same everything, is not going to get you high status in China, right? So that's our first clue that it's cultural. And then we also have these programs that have been used in schools, and the best catchphrase for it is like kindness is cool, where it gets to the point of like the way to get status in school is to be kind. It takes a real culture shift, but it happens, right? Because whatever
Wow.
is cool is cool. So it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be that aggression is cool.
Huh.
Yep.
That's
And
amazing.
there's a couple different programs, for anybody working in a school. There's the Kiva anti-bullying program, and I'm probably going to mess up the pronunciation, but the Olweus, Olweus bullying prevention program. There are a couple where you really just can take them off the shelf and try to get them going in your school.
We'll put those links on the site if I can get those from you later too,
Yeah,
so
Yeah,
that way
thank you.
absolutely.
people can connect through it. One thing that was really interesting about your story, Gail, and I'd like you to actually go into it instead of me. Could you talk how the law and the education and your pathway there? Because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, actually, I mean, part of it is who I am today is I think that I felt so misunderstood, and I felt like I just was wrongfully accused so many times as an adolescent. And I think that probably had a lot to do with why I wanted to focus on education. So
Mhm.
I knew I wanted to do education. I was in college. I looked super young. I was like, I can't walk into a school now. I'm going to get asked for my hall pass all the time. So I
Yeah.
thought I want to do a little bit more school before I go be a teacher. And I really didn't like the laws around education in our country. So I thought, oh, if I go to law school, I will learn to write new laws for education. That's not at all what you learn in law school.
Mm-hmm.
It's was just completely naive. But luckily, I enjoyed law school. And then after law school, I went to get the teaching experience because I wanted to do policy work, but I don't whatever realm you're in, I don't think you can do the policy work without having experienced what it is that you're trying to make policy around, right? So I thought I needed some time in schools.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We were talking about immersion a couple episodes ago, and I was saying that I think every senator should have to go through some sort of immersion in a law that they're passing before they do it.
Ooh, I like that. I love that idea. Gail, I had a question for you. So, you know, you're this young kid who's feeling like you deserve to be where you're at, feeling like you deserve to be alone and basically be rejected. Where was the shift in that? Like, where did you have that moment where you came to a new light and said, okay, not enough is enough?
So that's going to tie into, what I was saying about culture a little bit.
Mhm.
I moved schools. And at my new school, being smart was cool, and liking books was cool.
Oh,
And so the things that I had to offer suddenly became more appealing. And I was not cool by any stretch of the imagination at that middle
Mhm.
school, but I felt more valued because the things that I was interested in were more valued in that setting. So that was part of it. Another part of my own experience that ties into the research is protective factors. So
Mhm.
I said in the essay, my siblings. I had at the time I've got more now, but at the time I had three brothers, and they didn't always love me. They often hated me, but they were never indifferent. Right? They always
Mhm.
cared what I had to say, one way
Really?
or the other.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a real protective factor for me. Also, I had I don't know how to describe her. She was my kindergarten teacher, and then my mom hired her as sort of like a babysitter, sort of nanny. And she was just an adult figure who I could do no wrong in her eyes. And actually, she was the one person I told about the incident. I didn't tell my
Mhm.
mom about the incident. The one person, her name was Lena. I told Lena, and she, all of a sudden, just like that, she had my back. She was like, "Oh, it must be because they're jealous of this or they're jealous of that." I and the research does show having that one person in your corner, having siblings or close cousins or close friends who are just around, even if you don't share the experience with them. These are things that can just keep you from hitting rock bottom.
Oh,
That puts a
great
big
point.
smile on my face. Like, I just having the space to be seen, heard, and helped. You know, like
Mhm,
I go, that's all anyone ever wants. So
Yeah.
mhm.
thank you.
We had a kid on a couple episodes ago, and he had one coach, that was in his corner. And we talk a lot about that third party, whether it be the sheepdog or the government website calls it the third bystander or something along those lines. But it's amazing what that does, either the bystander or the one person in your corner, and it's from a school standpoint, I know you worked in the school, and we've talked about how hard it is because teachers are already so busy, there are already so much going on. Do you have any advice, for teachers that are also trying to deal with the bully subject too, or things that they could watch out for, or tools, or, anything like that?
Absolutely. On the topic of what I was just talking about, there's great research on having just one friend. The difference
Mhm.
between having zero friends and having one friend is absolutely massive for kids' mental health. And
Yeah.
then there's also some other research around friendship in schools. And what it shows is that kids actually are really tempted to make superficial friendships, right? And and we all do better with friendships that are based on similarity. But kids, they'll often look at skin color, they'll look at gender, they'll make these decisions based on a really surface level similarity instead of deeper similarities. So as a
Hmm.
teacher, you can say, "Huh, you know, um, you're obsessed with Minecraft. Look, Kyle's also obsessed with Minecraft." And you can try to find these sort of deeper interests that kids share and almost like plant the seeds of a friendship, if that makes sense, because it has such protective power.
That not
Well,
only makes sense, that's genius. Because these kids that are younger, they're not going to see those connections, but the teacher knows a little bit about them. I think that's wonderful. I think that's a great piece of information.
My mind goes into I sometimes split and go into all the positives and all the negatives on both sides. And I look at like sometimes when two kids are bullied, they become very dangerous because they at least have some support system, but they have a support system to do the dangerous thing.
Yeah.
And that's why I go like, okay, this is why it's so important and so critical that people are aware of everything. Like bullying isn't just this thing that just happens like, oops, it happened. And it's important that we're aware and we really support one another, because if we don't support one another, there's consequence to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, peer influence, especially as kids get older, the peer influence is huge in what your friends think is cool, you think is cool.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The research just confirms it again and again and again, and it works in both directions, right? Like I said,
Mhm.
reading was cool at my new school, so I fit in better. I made friends, but it goes the other way too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why you're right. We haven't even used the word culture in this program before. We're 7 episodes deep, but you're right. The culture of what you're surrounding is, whether it's a country, whether it's a school, whether it's a after school program, that culture, it's almost, I looked at it the same as heroes, right? We are a combination of who our heroes are. And if as a country or a school or, anything else, if we're looking at the wrong type of hero, then we're going to try to follow that wrong type of path. I mean, I was watching a documentary on Mexico, and I found out that most of the kids in Mexico these days are looking up to the drug dealers. And in fact, they have these banda songs about them, and like one guy will be named Ghost Mafia or something like that. And the kids will literally have people play these banda songs. And I'm thinking to myself, if this is the heroes of these kids, no wonder it's a perpetuating system. So we have to watch out for culture, and we have to watch out for heroes, because that's a part of our culture and what we're looking up to. And I've
Well,
asked the
one of the
question. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say one of the messages to teachers is that your classroom, you have a certain amount of power in setting the culture in your classroom, even if in the
Yeah.
rest of the school. And I'll tell this story from when I was teaching high school, and it was years ago, but it was the kind of place where there was just a lot of street talk in the class, and I first came in, and it just came into the classroom, and a lot of the insults came into the classroom, and over time I built trust with the kids, right? And you build trust, and then you have, I almost think of it as like currency, right? You have the capital to then tell them things, and they'll listen to you because they trust you, right? And they know you care about them. So one thing
Yeah.
I really crack down on is use of the word gay to mean negative, to mean bad, right? Oh man, that's so gay, that's so gay.
Yeah.
So I couldn't have walked in the first day of school and been like, we don't do that. um, but after I had been there for about 6 months, we got a new kid in the class, right? Kid comes in, and it's loud, like people are talking. He goes, man, that's so gay. And the whole class stops. And another
Hmm.
kid turns to him and he goes, and this is my maiden name at that point, turns to him and he goes, in Miss Abby's class, we do not use gay as a synonym for bad. And then they all just start talking again. And that had become the culture of my classroom. It just was unacceptable.
That's awesome.
I've always thought that if the coolest kid in the class could step in and kind of say, hey, bullying's not cool, it changes the culture. But what's great about what you're saying is, as a teacher, you had gained some of that, let's call it a cool factor in the class,
Mm.
right? You had gone to a little bit of a cool level, for a teacher in class, and you were able to step in almost as that cool kid in class and kind of direct the culture.
Yeah, I do think that we can underestimate how much influence teachers have, and there actually are some studies on this too. If a teacher treats a kid dismissively, or it's clear a teacher's frustrated with a kid, their status goes lower in their. They do questionnaires and they ask the kids to rank the kids in their class, right?
Huh.
Kids who the teacher clearly doesn't like, they lose status in the class. And it's also one of the reasons that some of these educational solutions work so well. So, for example, you can teach kids about the difference between the two types of popularity. And when most of us think about popularity, we think about status, right? We think
Yeah.
about who's cool, who's not cool. But there's actually two types of popularity, and the other one is likability. And once you hear it, it totally makes sense because you think about your own life and you think about, that kid who like everybody liked them. And
Yeah.
it wasn't that they were particularly cool. They just were cool with everybody, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And when you teach kids that there's these two types of popularity, it kind of gives them permission to stop chasing status, right? They can be like, oh, well, if I'm just likable, and what do we mean by likable? Like it's usually like, you're not super rigid and inflexible. Like there's all these things you can do to be more likable. You listen to people, right? You listen to what
Yeah.
people are saying to you. And there's a workbook out, and if parents are listening, they can find it on Amazon. But there's a likability workbook where kids can just get permission to step out of that status chase and make something else the goal instead.
That's
You're
amazing.
you're awesome, Gil. Have you read How to Win Friends and Influence People?
I read it so long ago, so you're gonna have to
Uh-huh.
refresh my memory.
So I ended up reading the book and I wasn't really like impressed because I'm like, yeah, everyone should be doing this. Like,
Yeah.
okay, it's just like something that you do. And as I went through my journey, because you talked about empathy, and I didn't. Sometimes we have skill sets we don't even know that we have, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's on the same status to me. They always have been. Like I've never like, well, I'm better now because I've done this. I would sign my bullies. I would sign a bullies contract, or not a contract. I use an autograph. I make an autograph because everyone's going through something.
Yeah.
Like that's the way I see the world is, okay, everyone's going through something. And when you start getting them to question it and look within and say like, hey, should you really be doing that? Should you really be acting like that? Would you want someone to act like to you like that? It gets them thinking, and it gets them getting out of their own head and being like, well, what do I want? Because people don't want to see people hurt. It's not, it is a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Like we just become like, oh, well, I got to do this because this is what the culture says. I'm like, we're so capable of so many things in our life. We're capable of greatness.
Absolutely. And Cliff, if I can turn it around on you and
Mhm.
ask a little bit about what your home environment was like,
Uh-huh.
there's really good information on how much influence parents and family can have on that mindset. If we act like there's scarcity, right? Like there's a limited amount of good stuff in the world and we have to fight
Yeah.
for it and get it. It's a lot harder for kids to go out into the world and have empathy and see others not as competitors,
Mhm.
and see others as not out to get them, and have a more cooperative mindset. So I wonder where you got that from.
So my parents, here's what's really interesting. So I have two dads. One
Me too.
biological dad drove away, and I knew he wasn't coming back. My mom would tell me, "Yeah, he'll see you again." No, he's not. I was really good at reading energy, and he didn't call me until my 39th birthday. Fast forward, my mom remarried when I was 6, and he is the guy that I call dad to this day. And just off of what Tyler was saying, like, don't you regret? Like, no, you can't know what you don't know when you're in it. You can't know that these things that have happened to you will turn you into who you are now. And so I saw it, and I'm like, all right, people who are supposed to be there for you sometimes aren't. They're going to drive away. They're
Mhm.
going to leave. And sometimes people who don't have to be there for you can be there for you in ways you never even comprehended. And so that's why my mind goes into that split of seeing all the good possibilities and all the bad possibilities.
Absolutely. I love it.
Yeah, and thank you for seeing me, because I see you, and you're absolutely a shining beacon. And to see and define regrets and being like, oh, I don't need to hold on to this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm done holding on to it.
Yep.
Hmm.
You
And
kind of
they
burn.
also, with regret, a big piece of making the most of your regrets is self-compassion, which is so
Yep.
relevant to my story, right? Is getting to the point where I can feel bad for that little girl that I was, and getting to the point where I can say, I take responsibility for what I did, but at the same time, look at all this that was going on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time we hold on to our regrets because we're just so mad at ourselves. And when we
Yeah.
can take the time to feel a little compassion for ourselves, then we can move to the point of making the most of the regret instead of being stuck with it.
100%.
And that's where some people can feel aloof about regrets, right? Where they just don't even regret it. It's like, oh, whatever. Or we can beat ourselves up so long, you're saying, we can make it anti-productive.
Yeah, absolutely. Before, I've got an article coming out in Real Simple magazine on this, and you've just, Tyler, put your finger on one of the steps that comes before self-compassion, which is acceptance and admission, right? It
Mhm.
happened. Like for some
Yeah.
people, it can be a big deal even to admit that it happened and they regret
Yeah.
it. Like that's a big deal. It's a big first step.
I love that.
I really want to get your insight on something because I think your mind would be great to ask this question. I don't know. Have you seen the documentary Bully
I
on
did,
Netflix?
yeah, I did. I
Do you
cried a lot.
remember? Yeah, it was so sad. And so that's actually like one of the defining reasons we started this podcast is like, you felt like you wanted to ride the bus with these kids and help them out, but we can't ride the bus with every kid, and so one question I have is like Alex Libby and his parents, he'd come home from his bullying and he wouldn't talk that much about it.
Mhm.
And you talked about having a good support system and the ways that we can kind of, help. What would be your suggestion to his parents on like the best way to help him with what he's going through?
You know, that's a really, really interesting question. And I think it's actually answered in part by the documentary. One of the things that was most striking to me, and I think it was intended to be by the filmmakers, was the adult
Mhm.
reactions to these kids.
Yeah.
And the like, no, you have to shake his hand, forgive him. He said he's sorry. And the kids there, like, what are you talking about? Like, I just got creamed, like, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the best pieces was I think they're in a kitchen maybe, but one of the moms says to one of the dads, like, he doesn't see you cry. He doesn't see you cry. And I think if we expect our kids to be vulnerable with us, right, and admit that something bad has happened to them, we have to be vulnerable in that same way with our kids. Now, we don't want to there's something called parentification where you make your kid into the parent and you turn to that kid for comfort, and that shouldn't happen. But there's a difference between that and being like, I had a really rough day, or like
Oh,
I've really been
wow.
struggling through this problem at work, or God, I'm so upset and I'm going to let my kids see me cry, because the vulnerability goes two ways, right?
So
100%.
especially as a dad, I mean, I'm not a dad, but Cliff can vouch for this because he is one. Especially for a dad, it's probably tough to like show anything other than superhuman dad. But you're
Right.
saying that can be part of the issue because it's like if dad can only be seen as superhuman and I'm letting him down, kind of, I think is what you're getting at,
Exactly.
right? Wow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes we don't realize that one of the best things we can do for our kids is to be human, right?
Yeah.
Is to show that we deal with the same all those big emotions that they deal with. We're dealing with too.
Yeah.
They're
So
normal, right?
powerful.
You normalize their experience.
How do you feel? Like, am I right? Like, you want to be your kid's hero. So
I
would you ever let yourself be vulnerable
I'll tell
before this
you,
conversation?
Gail, you're absolutely amazing, and I'm going to answer the question.
No, I won't.
So 100%. And this is why. We're all learning, we're all growing, we're all becoming. Mastery is something that it's never ending and it's always exciting. You're always enjoying the process. And I had this was before I had my kids. Sometimes my clients helped me along the way. I got knocked out on live TV. The one embarrassing thing I never wanted to happen, especially with Joe Rogan, like, okay, we're going to watch it from this angle and now this angle and now this angle. Like, all right, are you done, Joe?
This was like the top 10 clip for like 10, 20 years.
Yes, yes. And so I was just kind of like, well, that sucks. And I went back to work to do what I do. But I had one of my clients and we weren't really connecting in the way that I would have liked. But he said something to me. He said, now I know you're the truth. And I didn't know what he meant by that. Like, what do you mean? And he goes, all of the things you say, that greatness within, that what you stand for, that, hey, have a positive attitude. I knew it was true because when that happened to you, you were still the same person. You didn't change who you were. And that was where I'm like, oh my goodness, like people see me as this thing that can't be stopped. I'm a human just like anybody else.
Yeah.
And it's all I have control over is my attitude behind things. Sometimes it's going to go my way and sometimes it won't, but I still get to choose how I'm going to show up.
Great
So
point.
he gave me an insight doing that.
And you seemed more heroic because of the fact that you weren't, flawless, right?
Yeah.
People don't
Yeah.
want perfection in their heroes.
No,
They really don't.
I can't think of many heroes that are in ancient history, modern history, anything that don't have one thing we're looking at that's flawed, right?
Right.
Be like Superman, who like even kryptonite doesn't hurt him anymore. Like, oh,
Yeah.
well, he just saved the day and nothing happened.
So him and I are nothing alike,
Yeah.
and so maybe that's part of what it is. It's like having this, Achilles heel, so to speak, as a means of like, okay, they are somewhat like me in some ways. There is chances of, not complete success.
I got a weird question for you because I love your insights. You have 5 kids, right? 5 kids. So what's one of the biggest life lessons you've had in your journey with being a parent?
It actually is on this exact same topic of perfection, and it's apologizing and taking responsibility when you mess up. I think a lot of times we have these values we want for our kids, right? Like we want them to own up to their mistakes. We want them to be kind. We want them to be flexible. We want them to do their best to stay calm. And then we don't model those things, right? We don't do it. We say, no, you're going to do this because I tell you to do it. Or we think that, oh, we're going to lose face and they're not going to listen to us and they're going to see us as less powerful if we admit a mistake. But the reverse is true. When you've messed up, you just say, I've messed up. And they actually, just like your client, like they'll follow you anywhere. Like you'll have so much more influence that way than just that, iron fist kind of control.
Yeah.
I can't go ahead.
The power of influence, I'll tell you, like when I was younger and my dad did drive away, I wanted to be such a fighter where I'm like, it doesn't matter what happens to me. I'm going to be stronger than anything that comes my way. And just like life, what you go after changes, right? And I got really, really strong. I was like, I can protect myself in everything, physically and mentally. And then it turned into, all right, I got to be a safe space for people. I got to be a safe space for people because everybody wants the same thing. Started realizing everybody wants the same thing. And then it turned into, I want to build a legacy. Like I don't ever want to be gone from this world because I have some good stuff to share. And it wasn't even just because of me. It was my audience, my clients, my people, him, you. When people point to one another and say, you have a good message, you need to share that with more people.
Yeah.
Because it resonates. And I'm telling you, off of what you're saying, I want to give that to you and say, you have a great message.
Totally.
Keep sharing.
Thank you so much. I mean, from a parenting perspective too, though, I hear you saying this and I see all the wonderful things you've accomplished, but you're so go, go, go. You got to make sure you also cut yourself a little slack, right? You got to make sure it can't be, it's never good enough, right? I've got this next level I've got to get to, because nothing will ever be good enough. And that's another thing we see in parenting. And it's another thing we see in suffering kids is when they get this impression that they just have to achieve. And just being them is not good enough. So when you're asking me about what parents can do, that's another huge deal is I think we all talk about unconditional love, but we don't necessarily know what it means. And what the psychologists tell me it means is I love you just for being you. It doesn't have to do with how you're acting. It doesn't have to be with what you achieve. It's just waking up in the morning and the act of just being you is why I love you and why I will never stop loving you.
Yeah, it's such a simple thing and a thing just like any muscle, the more you practice it, the simpler and easier it becomes. And I'll tell you, so my go it was funny because I didn't know how much of a goer I was. And my wife caught me in something because I went from being a fighter to an entrepreneur. I'm like, babe, once we get the money, then imagine all the she's like, you're never gonna stop. And in seeing that, I saw myself. She held the mirror up to me, and I was just kind of like, oh yeah, that's right. So sometimes we just need that interflection, and for our audience who are dealing with anything, just remember there's someone out there for you. You know, sometimes that's what they need to hear, is to know there's someone, and you might not see them, but we're here. If you're listening to this message, there's something. Reach out to someone to get you moving forward.
Yeah, and another point I was going to make about parents is we communicate values to our kids, right? So one of the really important things is communicating for mental health, is communicating to kids that kindness is more important to us than achievement. So I am more proud of you when I see you being kind to another kid than when you get, an A+, right? And then going back to what Cliff is saying, this is all great that there's all this advice for parents and there's all this advice for teachers, but what do we do for those kids who are like the ones in the documentary, where the adults around you just don't get it? A lot of them in the documentary. And I think there it's sort of what Tyler's talked about in other episodes of it's a leap of faith, right? That there are people out there who will get it. There are people out there who will be that mirror, like Cliff's wife. Like there are people out there, and you've just got to hang on long enough to find those people, because you will find your people in the world.
Yeah, totally. We something keyed in right there too, and we if you think about reward systems, and this isn't everything. I can't help but bring business background into this stuff, but or governmental. Like when we're looking at a defeated system, usually it's a reward system that's askew. And you're so right on this, like high achievement versus being kind. Because if we've made the reward system around high achievement and never around kindness, then we've structured the system to be built on high achievement without kindness. And so if we can structure a reward system that would benefit people in entirety, like, hey, if you're a good person, this is what I'm after from you. This is what we want from you. This is when I'm going to praise you. This is when I'm going to, commend you. Then I think to me, that just clicked. Like when you said that, it's like, let's make the reward systems more in line with what we need out of people in life.
That's so powerful.
100%. And then what you're saying too clicks, hopefully, for the kids who are listening, because, as the adults, we're sitting here and we're like, why do we have a mental health crisis? Like, why do we have kids who are using bullying behavior with other kids? Like, why are they acting this way? And it's like, well, to a certain extent, it's on us. Like we've set up a system that incentivizes this type of behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Struck well. I mean, I think that's a super amazing point. You've really dove in and like pulled out some great bits of insight. Like I feel that like some of this will be really, really helpful for people and parents too, because we talked about like on a different episode, like about we're more clear with our dogs than we are with our kids on what we want, like the therapist brought it up, it's like, so I think we need to be a little bit more clear about what our reward systems are too. And when good behavior and bad behavior, not just always spanking the kid, as the way of keeping it in line. And when he happens to do good, we just leave him alone,
Yeah, absolutely. That positive reinforcement, that catch them being good. And to answer your question about kids sharing about their day, you can do that. You might have a kid who doesn't say anything to you at the end of the day, but one day they mumble something about a project they did. You reinforce that by saying, thank you so much for sharing that with me. Like I loved hearing about that. Thank you so much. And it incentivizes them. You're talking about reward structures to then share more with you, right? Whereas if the one thing your kid tells you is, so-and-so smacked me, and you say, well, why didn't you stand up for yourself? Well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Then it's the opposite. It's negative, right? And they have no incentive to share with you again. I did want to loop back to, yeah, exactly. One thing you said earlier about like, we can't be on the bus with kids. There actually are some initiatives to get parents in schools. There's this thing called Dads on Duty,
Oh,
where
wow.
dads
I've heard of that.
like have set up a shift, to be in the hallways, to bring some of that, like the culture of home and like what's acceptable here, and protecting people's bodies. And to bring part of that culture into schools, and especially now in the pandemic, and the aftermath of the school closures, what we see are school leaders who are so overworked. They just don't have enough bodies, right? They don't have enough adults.
Yeah.
So I would urge anybody who's listening who feels like they have any little bit of time to offer, reach out to a local school, even if you're not a parent, and say, how can I help? How can I just show up, ride the bus, show up on campus, be a force for good in the
That
school.
that is so awesome. They're actually, it strikes a chord. There's a local group here, and I think they're actually national now. Abused kid victims, and these motorcyclers have gotten together, and they'll actually go and they'll sit in front of, so the kid's going to have to testify about their abuse. And so these motorcycle gangs, people in, or maybe not necessarily gang members, but people in the motorcycle crowd with the leather jackets and big beards and a little bit scary individuals, they'll sit in front of the house, and like protect the kid, and the kid feels then safe enough to go testify. And that's kind of what I think you're getting at too. There's a certain safety with having the parents around, and the teachers are so overwhelmed already that if you can be that third party that's kind of keeping an eye out, and you're coming in there with just the heart, not all the stress of having to pass tests and things like that. So I think you brought some great tools to the program today. I think that would be a game changer for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as parents, you also can advocate with your district to have what they call a bus monitor. So,
Yeah.
you can have, not the driver's got to drive, and there are some amazing drivers who drive and also manage behavior on their bus. But you also can have a bus monitor who's a second adult on the bus, so you can advocate for these types of solutions.
Yeah. You don't know how bad I wanted to just sit there next to Alex on the bus. Like I thought about that for a good year. It's just like, to have the poor kid be stabbed and then you're just so helpless, like, please don't do that, and it's like, but if somebody was sitting there, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Cliff's sitting next to him, it's not going to happen, because they're going to look at Cliff as cool. It's not even the fact that he's going to push their head through the window. They're going to say, oh, look, here's a cool guy, he's friends with Alex.
Yeah.
And then that kindness that comes out of every one of Cliff's pores is just going to be infectious.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's I was speaking with my parents about this, and sometimes people get us and sometimes they don't, right? Like, that's just the name of the game. And I have a likability to me. I have just a likability, and they go, son, we can't just sit around singing Kumbaya. And that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, it's the start of something.
Sure.
It's the same thing as if you take a fighter and you have them overly stressed and overly chaotic and say, all right, go train. You can't train properly being in that state. That's the start of the state, feeling confident about yourself, feeling good about yourself. Because when people feel good about themselves, they don't want to see other people hurt unless they've been conditioned to do that.
There's this thing around too. It's like deciding who you want to be in life, right? And then deciding that you want to be an ambassador for that. Because you can say you want to be something, but how do you live it? And it's not always easy to live it, because we run across situations that make it hard at times, right? So how do we decide that, I want to be this likable, beautiful human being that loves people? I think you have to wear that like an ambassador in life and constantly arise to situations that you come across. One thing, and I don't want to derail the program too much, but I think I've been thinking about this a lot since it happened this week. And we started Bully This, and our hope was to help some kids, right? And to help some parents and some frustrations around this subject and not being able to ride the bus with every kid. So, and I thought we were going to do some good with it, but I didn't think of how it was going to affect me. There wasn't once I thought about how it was going to affect me. I don't know about you. I never thought what am I going to get out of this, or what it's going to change me. It's changed me. And I think it's just having all this awareness. I was in One Stop yesterday, the protein shop that Cliff and I go to have a shake. And there's a guy yelling at the guy behind the counter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's yelling at him and he's saying, hey, you should have told me you were out of this ice cream base, because you like the ice cream base too.
I love the ice cream base.
You should have told me you were out of this ice cream base because I wouldn't have ordered the drink, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sitting there and I have a special place for service industry people because I don't think they should be treated badly. And I was in the service industry for a while. And so usually my goal is then to say, hey, why are you giving them such a hard time? But I started thinking about that because of this program and talking about the third party and how you can think differently when you're outside of it and come in and kind of save this. And so the guy was really upset and he's like, I wouldn't have spent the money. I was like, okay, how much did you pay? He's like, $8. I'm like, here's the $8. I'll take the drink. I don't care what it is. And so the guy leaves after that. And the guy behind the counter thanks me profusely because he's in a horrible situation. He's trying to help the guy. There's nothing he can do. Even the guy in line says, thank you so much, because, that guy was not being the nicest guy and I was feeling bad about it. But I guess my point is, be aware of what kind of an ambassador you want to be in life, and then be aware at situations that you can actually help make a difference in. And I especially want to preach that to the kids a little bit, because we know, you get on the government website, it says the same thing. We know what that third party influence can be in those moments. It's like, if one of those girls had not been in the moment where you were delivering that message, if one of them had shown a little bit more heart in the situation and said, why are we doing this? We're friends. Your whole life's different, right?
Yeah, and I think actually what Cliff had said just before this is so important, because what you're saying about being a bigger person, being the person you want to be, right? Like living in the world the way that you think a person should, you have to have access to that. If you're in fight or flight mode, if
Yeah.
you've been, if you've been bullied, if you've been even just if you don't get enough sleep, like if you've got stress in your home and your family life, it's so much, it's almost impossible to then be that kind of person. Like
Yep.
we have to give these kids that baseline level of stability, right? And yeah, like if you're the kid, yeah, try to be a person, but also know that like we see how hard it is. It's really
Yeah.
hard to be like an upbeat, helpful person when you're getting beat down all the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do want to clarify my message there, because I've come to and maybe I'm wrong, but through the episodes, I've really come to this conclusion that this third party is so important, whether it be the teacher or the popular kid at school or just somebody. And so I'm speaking more because you're right. If it's the kid, it's hard to be that beacon of who you want to be when you're getting beat down. I'm speaking more to the sheepdog or that third party individual. Like, if you've decided, if your parents are teaching you well enough to be this kind person, help if you can.
Yeah, and actually the numbers help us here too, because it's about 20% of kids that report being the victims of bullying behavior, which means there's about 80% of kids, and take out the ones who are engaging in the bullying behavior, but a massive chunk, the vast majority of kids are sort of eligible to be that bystander who jumps in and becomes an ally, right?
Yeah.
And the culture is with you, right? Like the
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
a couple of those kids getting together and deciding to be allies, and all of a sudden the culture of the school shifts.
The whole world changes. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. That whole school, it changes for the good. And then whether they all know it or not, they would all enjoy it more. Because the kid that's actually bullying, he's not going home and feeling awesome about himself either. There's probably something going on at home. And then he doesn't feel like he can talk about it. But imagine if it was more of a culture of caring and openness. And now the bully, maybe I'm trying to get into too much of a utopian world, but now the bully's going and talking to people about, hey, this is happening to me at home, and then he's got a listening ear, and it's better across the situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the goal.
Or even the utopian world, like sometimes we have this zero-sum game, right? Where it's like, I need to get this for this to happen. And that's not necessarily true. Like I live in a world where everyone can win.
Yeah.
Everyone can win.
Yes.
When everybody's abundant, we all win. And so there was a one entrepreneur who was saying this to me, and it really, really struck me. He said, everybody is looking for you to succeed as long as you're not doing better than them. And that's where I was like, that's the likability, because I don't think anyone's better than me.
Yeah.
So I'm just really curious with everybody's action. Even when he's talking about where he came in as the third party, I'm thinking like, oh, I wonder what happened with this guy. I wonder what happened with the other guy. Like, that's just the way my mind works. And it's ultimately, great job, by the way, major dap on that. Saying like, okay, there's a solution here. oh, here's the solution, and then fast acting on the solution. And it takes like guides and wisdom and going through a process, going through a process to say, oh my goodness. And by the way, I knew this was going to change Tyler as he was going through his journey. I was super excited to be on board with him because he comes from just a good place. And that's where I'm like, oh, I'm down with this all day long. Yeah, you come from the best of places. He's always looking out for everybody. And we just have to point the mirror and make sure he looks out for himself too. That's what it comes down to. Everybody deserves grace. That's the game that I play.
100%. I couldn't have said it better when it comes to that feeling of scarcity, and also, what Tyler's point about systems, right? And when you look at those types of popularity, and the system of status is built such that there has to be higher and lower.
Yep.
Whereas likability, everybody can be likable. There's no scarcity there, right?
Yeah.
Like we can all be likable, and you being more likable doesn't make me relatively less likable, if that makes sense.
And what's super cool, so it's almost like the system needs to be changed. I'm all about mindset. I just love how minds work, and our minds generalize. Like they just naturally generalize into something, good and evil, light and dark, right and wrong. I'm like, this game's way more complicated than that. Like the more I look at life, I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know anything, but I do know things.
Yeah.
Like I know how to fight. I know how to get into someone's mind and take them to the next level. I know how to do certain things. You know how to write. I'm not a writer. In no way am I going to be like, all right, Gail, let me show you what's up. Like, no, there is hierarchy, but a hierarchy can be a very beautiful thing too.
Yeah, and I love, especially dealing with kids, I love the growth mindset stuff, and I keep saying yet, you're not a writer yet, because it's not something you've chosen to focus on, right? And
that's it.
I told Tyler this at one point, that the first time anybody ever told me that I was good at writing, I was in law school. I was what 22 years old before somebody told me that I was good at writing, and I hated writing when I was a kid. I hated it. I thought it was awful. I thought it was boring and stressful, and I thought I was no good at it, right? So that yet is so important, because you can be honest with yourself about your abilities, right? And say, and probably it's the same with kettlebells, right? Like I can't lift that one yet, right? I'll work up to it. So I love using that yet with the kids.
How much did your mind change towards writing the second you heard you're good at it, or somebody thought you were good at it?
So much. It really, that, like Cliff was saying, that mindset shift was just immense with that one comment. And in that essay about when I was having a really hard time in middle school, there was another comment that my mom made a comment, because I had these really chubby cheeks, and this one kid would come by and he would stick his finger in his mouth like this, and he would go like this when he would blow out his cheeks, and he'd be like, Gail the whale. And he'd just run by me at school and do it all the time. And my mom and I said something disparaging about my own cheeks, and my mom was like, oh, you just wait. When you're in older, like people's face is naturally thin as they age. So you're going to be so glad when you're older that you had chubby cheeks when you were little. And you can't tell as an adult which of those little offhand comments. I'm sure my mom thought nothing of it, right? It's one of 1,000 things she said that day. But to me, I held on to it for years, right? So I
it's
think
crazy what we'll hold on to.
I'll tell you this.
Yeah.
Every time you're up to bat, be as aware in the situation as you can, because you don't know. And that's what I've really tell you. Like, I'm like, all right, every moment counts, and some moments count more than others, and you don't know which it's going to be. Like I love the yet thing, and mine is yes and or but. Like I always say yes and or but. So it depends on where I'm looking to go. Like if I want to be a writer, I'm going to be a writer. If I want to be a pianist, I'm going to be a pianist. And I'm also going to be smart enough and cognizant enough to say, like, all right, if I want to get good at this, who do I go to get good at it? And I'm like, oh, everybody has this ability. Like, no, they're learning the ability. They're learning that critical thinking. And it's only because I did it so the awareness, Tyler, of what you're talking about. I was really, really aware that, wait a minute, life isn't just all sunshine. Like, it's just like really, really young. I'm like, so I was like almost over aware. And I had to learn how to, maybe that's probably why I dropped the regret thing. Because I'm just like, okay, I got to make sure everything's working as perfectly as I can. Because I'm risk adverse. And no one would guess that. Like, you stepped in a UFC cage and you're risk adverse? Yes.
Yeah, I think we keep coming back to also the importance of mentoring and coaching, and for
Totally.
kids to know you can't do it on your own. None of us here sharing our stories did any of this on our own, right?
No.
Yeah.
And even as adults, we don't. We have, you've got your wife holding up the mirror, and we all have people who are acting as mentors and coaches in our lives, even as we get older. And if we don't, we
Yeah.
should. If you don't have anybody serving that role, you're entitled to it. You deserve it, and with time, you be your best self and it'll come along.
Yeah.
Part
100%.
part of the male culture, is this. It's almost like to say you appreciate somebody, say you appreciate something in somebody, it feels weird. I have a hard time with it, but I've gotten to the point where I don't care how uncomfortable it is. If I think something nice about somebody, I say it. I've just gotten to that point. And sometimes, it's like I probably said it to Cliff before, like I'm thinking, you know what? I appreciate your friendship. You've been a really good friend to me, and if we would do more of that, because we think these nice things about people all the time, but we don't say them, often enough. I'm not going to bucket us males, but males especially, like I am going to bucket us. It's like, it's not the easiest thing to tell somebody you love them, but I can tell you there's been a couple times in my life I had friends pass away, and the last thing I said to them was something along the lines of, I appreciate your friendship, and you never regret these things. And so I throw that out there, because say it. If you think it, say it, because look at the long lasting effect. You're a writer now because of somebody saying something nice to you about writing. But then let's flip the coin for a second. Sorry. Let's flip the coin.
I was just going to give him a shout out. I was going to say his name is Adderson Francois. Adderson
Oh,
Francois.
yeah,
was the
please,
man who
nice.
told me.
Love it.
No, I love celebrating people that have done these great things. And now think of the flip side of the coin. If you're out there in some authority type manner, you're a parent, you're whatever, think of what negative thing you could be saying that's going to put this in their head forever. I still struggle with writing, to be on that subject. I try really, really hard at it the last year and a half, and I've gotten better at it, because my whole life I was told I was so bad at it. I was afraid of it. I feared it, like no other. And now I'm working on it. I'm getting better at it, because I think you need to work on what you fear.
How old were you with that fear?
Oh, that started early, 13, 14 years old.
Because I sometimes look at fear too. And are we going to go on fear or on faith? Like, some of the most powerful principles that I've learned are biblical principles. They're right in front of us. And the crazy thing is, the thing that is in front of us, we don't acknowledge completely, because it's around us all the time. So it's like, yeah, I already know that. When we say I already know that, we close our brain off. And when the brain is closed off, it cannot be the creative, imaginative thing that it was meant to be. But when we open up, and I'm like, wait a minute, we can create heaven on earth. Like, I really believe, like, we can create heaven on earth, but it can't come from just an individual's ego saying, I'll figure it out, I'll do this. And I do my best not to stay ego driven, right? But it's a practice, just like anything else. And people holding mirrors up and having the checks and balances.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's really, really crucial for people to also remember, like, we need checks and balances, because there's going to be times when I'm hungry, when I'm cranky, when I'm angry, when I haven't gotten enough sleep. And I'm like, I just go away from everybody and figure it out, figure my own junk out. And that's part of the system, like a system where we're co-creating this utopia together.
Yeah.
Saying, like, everybody has a piece in this place. You created a culture in that moment, because cultures are moment by moment.
Yeah.
Like, what people look at is like, well, you can't, or you won't, or okay, we're just going to close off. Or are we going to go like, okay, what culture can I create today? What culture can I create today?
Yeah.
100%. And we're walking that line again between personal responsibility and being your best self and doing your best, and also realizing that we've got context, right? Like we are all swimming in culture. So when you talk about men
Mhm.
and you talk about the, withholding the I love you, or the fearing that it's going to appear weak for you to do that kind of expression, that's not because of anything natural to you. That's because you've been raised to think that, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
because in so many thousands of small little messages you got your whole life was, hey, watch out for that. Watch out for that
Yeah.
expression. Like,
Yeah. Don't do
so
that.
we have to rise
Guys, don't
above,
do
but at
that.
the same time, we got to, have compassion for ourselves of like, oh, well, this is why I'm not so great at that. Right.
I talk on the greatness within. My whole message is about greatness within,
Mhm.
about being your greatest self. And thank you for touching on a little bit of my past, Gail. But I'll say this, and this is for any of the little kids who are listening, to any parents listening. So my biological dad calls me on my 39th birthday. And the craziest part to me was he needed my comfort, in that he needed me. And all of the things that I've been through had given me the strength to be there for him. I had enough space because he needed it. Now, I would have never guessed that I would have ever been that person. There's a badass in every one of you. And I'm just going to say that there's an amazing, amazing human being filled with so many things. And the beauty is, you're only one person. You're unique because you have your own special perspective. It took me some time to realize that, like, wait, we all get our own special perspective. Like, just as me and Tyler's like, yeah, we don't always see the same thing. No, we don't. Because Tyler sees Tyler's world, and Cliff sees Cliff's world, and Gail sees Gail's world. And that's the beauty of it. Just to see it in different lenses and go like, how does Tyler's world help me in my moment? How does Gail's world help me in my moment?
Mhm.
And you pulled it together for him, right? For
Yeah.
your biological father. But
Yeah,
am I guessing right when I say that act of forgiveness, of being able to be there, and that actually did a service to you? Did you feel better about yourself, and you feel a little more at peace having exercised that little act of forgiveness?
100%. It's interesting because we talk about the zero-sum game, but sometimes people don't talk about the win-win game. Whenever I coach one of my clients are propelling me forward. It's not even about me anymore. It's like, Cliff, your message has to get out. They're saying it to me. And that's where I'm like, crap. Okay, let me get a little bit braver. Let me get a little bit braver. And it becomes this win-win situation. Even with my 5-year-old, my 1-year-old, they're teaching me just as much as I'm teaching them.
You signed your dad's autograph.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when
100%.
Winona couldn't do it. I kind of think Winona could do it now.
Yeah.
I think that's an old story, but
Yeah.
you did. You signed it for him.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gail,
When
I
it
want
comes
to.
to
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to loop us back to allies, and the I think you call them the sheepdogs, the allies, and some things that we won't do for ourselves, we can do for others. So you might not have been in a place to forgive your dad for yourself, but you do it for him, and then all of a sudden you reap the rewards. And I think the allyship works the same way. Of you stand up for somebody else, and you stand up for what's right, and you stand up for the culture you want to see at your school and the environment you want to live in. Um, and you do it for somebody else, and then all of a sudden you realize that you've reaped so many rewards from that act.
Yeah, absolutely. You almost wish you could be the little angel on somebody's shoulder, that is younger years, and be like, I promise you, this will be something that you'll look back on and you'll be like, I'm glad I did this. I don't think very many people in life would look back on bullying and say, I'm glad I did that. I mean, I hope they wouldn't say that, and that's what's so hard about, and what's so important about mentoring, at a young age, because it's so hard. You haven't seen these things yet, right? 40 years old, I'm still learning things all the time. I could still use a little angel on my shoulder telling me, but kids especially need it.
Yeah. I got a question for you, Gail.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Oh, were you getting ready to say something? All right. So you mentioned in high school that you were basically planting seeds. That's what I kind of saw. I was planting seeds, building that relationship capital with the kids. so that their culture would stand the way that it needed to stand.
Yeah.
So you knew something was going to happen, and you had a planning process in that 6 months. What made you see that out? Like, did you know it was going to take 6 months? Have you done this before?
I actually think it was a lot less calculated than that. I actually think w- what it was empathy, which we've talked about and you've talked about on other episodes of just, trying to put myself in those kids' shoes, trying to put myself in the shoes of a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, which I had all three in ninth grade. Um,
Mm.
and how are they feeling, and when they roll into my classroom shouting, right? um is it from joy, is it from frustration, and try to figure out where they're coming from and what's the most I can make of that, right? And
Mm,
how do I give a little, and how do I it wasn't like, oh, I need to win over these kids, right? It was like, how do I
Mhm.
show up in the best way for these kids, and how do I see each one of them and see what they're dealing with, um and make it clear that I see it. And I think that process just naturally built that capital. And then I kind of found myself with it. But it really wasn't a means to an end. It was just um, trying to see everybody and show up as my best self so they'll be their best self.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So I love the empathy aspect, because I think you were mentioning, no, you were mentioning it actually, Go. You said status can go down when a teacher is acting cruel or mean.
Mhm.
And one of my gifts and curses is that I do see everyone as equal status, negative and positive. And I'm always looking and reflecting and understanding. And eventually I realized, like, oh, people are full of crap. Like, it's just all of the things that they've packaged into their head. Um, but that skill is such a powerful skill for both sides. Like, when you can take the time to empathize, when you can take the time to get into someone else's shoes. Because my whole thing was like, I want to help people so much. I want to help them so much. And then I realized, like, oh my goodness, it's an alignment thing. Like, we're helping each other. We're supporting each other.
And if you want to know something really cool, there is great research that shows that the more that the unpopular kids in middle school, high school, if you're low status, you actually end up having more empathy as an adult.
Wow.
Mm,
That's what we see over and over again about the guests we have on the show is they've been great at taking this adversity and using
Hmm.
it to build themselves. And then they grow up, and like I say it quite often on the show, they grow up with this huge heart at the same time. So they've used these things, they've developed these frameworks, which you have incredible frameworks. I've learned a lot from you today. I'd love to actually take this as a moment to like talk about like what are you into now? Like what are you doing these days? What's driving you? What's your passions?
That is a great question. I now I write, and a lot of the things I've been talking to you about are the things that I write about. I find psychology super interesting. So there's the stuff on regret.
Yeah.
I wrote about venting and some myth busting, right? Like we think, oh, you vent and you feel better, but there's just all this great research that you don't.
Huh.
And
Wow.
yep.
it's much more complicated than that. But little things like that, just looking into it, and then reading those academic studies, and reading through all their jargon, and figuring out what it is they're really saying and what they've really found, and then communicating that to other people. When I wrote the essay about my experience, I got a lot of people reached out to me. It a lot of people read it, and a lot of people reached out to me, and I expected people to say, I was a bully and I feel really bad about it, or I behaved like a bully. I try not to call people bullies as opposed to saying bullying behavior, but I behaved like a
Yeah.
bully and I feel really bad about it. And I kind of expected that. Um, and and I expected people to reach out and say, I was the victim of this kind of behavior, and it sucked, right? And
Yeah.
then there were two other categories of people I did not expect to hear from. There was a significant number of people who were just like me, who were like, I did this horrible thing and I've always felt so horrible about doing it. But reading your story has helped me have compassion for myself. Like looking at you, I see, oh, wow, I actually was provoked too. Like I can take responsibility at the same time I was provoked. And then there was this other category of people that was just blew my mind of like, I don't know, more than a dozen people take the time to look me up, find my email address, reach out to me and say, I wish I'd been an ally. I read your story and I wasn't mean to anybody, but I really wish I'd been an ally.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the power of writing and the power of publishing is just getting information out there, whether it's the academic stuff or whether it's, my own story and the way that that is going to impact people.
And I think
Love it.
that's one of the struggles I have with Bully. This is, I'm sharing more than I ever have in my life, and this has been, comfortable. But look at the impact you were able to give by being vulnerable and writing your story. Look at how many people that's helped. Look at how much introspect. And now you're on this show now, and people are learning from you. And so I think sometimes, have you learned to face those fears a little bit more and, realize that there's benefits to facing them?
I mean, I've been pretty fearless, honestly, with it. Like I put a lot out there, that,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not as ill-advised. It is ill-advised. It's not a great idea to put quite so much out there. But I do think it's worth it if it helps people.
Were
And
you cringing
I
when you hit the
honest
send button? You're like, okay. Did you cringe
yeah.
when you hit it?
Yeah, a little bit because it really was a shameful thing for me for a long time. And we have so many negative emotions that actually have a positive side to them, right? Like
Mhm.
guilt and regret, we talked about, they can have a positive side. Shame doesn't. Shame is just a purely bad emotion for us to feel ashamed of ourselves. And people are going to quibble and be like, oh, well, but if you anticipate shame, that stops you from doing bad things. And I totally agree with that. But I'm talking about once you're already experiencing the shame is so corrosive. So to the extent that doing this allowed me to just let go of those last remnants of shame, it was just such a powerful experience for me.
That's wonderful. I mean, if you get a chance, Cliff, you would love Gail's website where she's got a lot of her freelance writing stuff. And
Yeah.
she's wrote for some huge people. We're honored to have her on the show. Like she's wrote for some big people, and like her writing is incredible. I was infatuated with the article that I announced at the start of the show. Like I just thought it was such a journey, and I felt a lot of emotion from it.
I love it.
Are you going to continue to write? Is that what you're going to be doing these days?
Yeah, that's so long as I have ideas I want to look into. Yeah, that's my plan.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean,
I
your
also
kids are
I
keeping you
volunteer in
busy.
the school. Like I'm it's always going to be with kids, right? It'll always touch on kids in some way because that's just what I've always been naturally drawn to. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'll find myself back in the classroom one day. Maybe I'll try to get some laws passed on things that I think are important. But right now, the writing is just it works really well for my family too, to have the flexibility to when they're in school, I write. When they're home, I'm with them.
Do you
Nice.
do you know Steve Jobs' Stanford speech? He talks about connecting the dots backwards. We've talked about it on this show too. Your dots are connecting like no other. It seems random. Study law, study education, but your dots are connecting. And what you just said, like I was like, aha, she's going to influence the educational system even more because she has all the talents to do it, and she has the heart to do it too. So your dots, like I can see them connecting. Can you see them?
It's totally yeah, I see them connecting, and it's like a weird thing to be bouncing through all these things, but there is a through line of always caring about kids and, the curiosity and the researching and going to find out what's really going on, and then the writing it, because a lot of the type of law I practice was writing. So those things, those dots connect. And then the other thing I'll say, again, for kids, if there's kids listening, is it's really just been following what I'm interested in. Like none of
Yeah.
this was planned. It wasn't like I was like, you know what, I bet I'd be good at writing. It was like I just was following the stuff I'm interested in, and that's what I still do. That's how I get my article ideas. Is I'm like, huh, that's interesting. I want to know a little bit more about that, and then it turns
I
into a
love it.
piece.
Oh, I absolutely love that.
It's funny because the way that you speak, they say an expert when you ask a question and they say it depends
Yeah.
because there's always
Yeah.
layers. There's always layers behind everything that's happening. It's not as simple as like yes, no. And then the other piece. So you speak on shame. Now, I love understanding energy. Wow. I would just say, wow, it's the heaviest energy a person will ever feel. and I would never put that on anybody. Now I'm gonna take a little bit of a left turn. I apologize, everyone, but Game of Thrones, there was a scene where one of the most evilest people, I can't remember her name because I'm not really a huge Game of Thrones fan,
Cersei.
but they were saying shame,
Cersei.
shame, and they had her walking, and that fighter in me came out. Like, I'm like, you don't do that to another person, no matter what. You don't do that to them, because they're gonna lash out. They're gonna be dangerous. No one's winning this. Like, no one's winning this game. So, you bringing that up, just it really hit a chord, because it's important that people realize you got to drop shame, because if you're holding onto it, no one's winning.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Gail, I hate to wrap this up, but we don't want to take your whole day away from you. But I'd love to give you one more chance. You got anything that you want to say to the audience, or anything, final thoughts, or anything that you're working on that you want to announce?
Oh my gosh. Thank you. No, I think it all comes back to empathy. I will stop and I will say, when Cliff called me an expert, the beauty of my job is I'm not the expert, right? I read all of the research that there are so many people working hard. Like each of those studies I mentioned, like there's somebody in the school asking kids, rank your friends from 1 to 20 on their status, to figure out these things and be able to give us this guidance. So I see myself as like a mouthpiece for the experts, and being able to take their work and get it out to people. But no, I think it's empathy. And I think with the kids, it's empathy for yourself, first and foremost. And like Cliff said, the faith, and just, there's the It Gets Better project. I don't know if you guys know about that for LGBTQ youth. But I think it's true for all youth, like who are suffering. It gets better. Hang in there. Because we've seen our rates of death by suicide, going up in really shocking ways. And if you can just hang in there, it gets better.
Absolutely. And whether
And
you
to
know it or
parents
not.
too. To parents too, right? Like it can get rough. Parenting today is really, really, really hard. And I come on here and I say, oh, well, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. But that's against a backdrop of like, I get it. It's really, really, really hard. And you've also got to just hang in there.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been amazing, and thank you so much for taking the time to come out and speak to the story. And you've given me some new frameworks that I'll use on the show from now on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, thanks for tuning in once again. I think Gail was amazing. I think that it's amazing to watch people like Gail and how they connect their dots and how they're doing these things, because of, something they were uncomfortable with in their youth, but now it's led to what they're doing that's improving the world. And so I know it's not easy to think about this if you're the kid scared to ride the bus tomorrow, but I promise you, you're building that heart right now. You're building those talents, and you never know where your stars are going to line up. So thank you, folks, for episode 7. We'll be back with episode 8 next week. Have a great one.
Thank you, everyone.
You've been listening to Bully This, A Hero's Journey. The effects on kids that are bullied are many. Increased risk for depression, anxiety, sleep difficulties, lower grades, and dropping out of school. It's a real problem, and that's why we created this show. We're acutely aware of the pain, shame, and damage that bullying causes, and our passion is to help kids and families to know that there is always help, that there is always a solution. We hope you've gotten some useful information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Facebook at Bully This, A Hero's Journey. Take care, and we'll see you next time.